My name is Dr. Jim Brazo. I'm a turfgrass professor at the University of Tennessee. In this video, we're going to talk about POA control and overseeded ryegrass. In this first trial, there'll be no herbicides involved. The only thing we're going to focus on is plant competition. We're going to look at differences in ryegrass overseeding rate compared to other cool season grasses and how suppressive that can be for POA in an overseeded stand. So hopefully it's fairly obvious in our first plot here. This is a non-treated check. So this received no overseeding. This was a stand of bermudagrass and other weeds. We didn't do any overseeding to this plot. And you can see with no plant competition from actively growing turf, we have plenty of weeds. We have POA in here. We have lots of winter annual broadleaf weeds, particularly parsley pert and several others. No plant competition is going to be a scenario for weed infestation. The best defense that we have against any weed, be it POA or any other species, is going to be actively growing turf. We'll move to our next plot here. This is Perennial Ryegrass. This was overseeded on October 4th at 300 pounds per acre. And you can see really good canopy coverage here. When we compare this to our non-treated check, a dramatic difference, right? There's no herbicides here. All we have done is in October of 2023, introduce plant competition from ryegrass and look at the suppression of the surrounding weed pressure just from that ryegrass overseed alone. This next plot is ryegrass now, but we've overseeded, we've doubled our rate. We've went to 600 pounds per acre of ryegrass seed. Some people may question what's the rationale in doing so. The differences are subtle, but the weed suppression is there. If we look at, say, the POA pressure in the first plot that we looked at with ryegrass overseed to this plot, we have less POA in this plot that's been seeded at 600 pounds as compared to 300 pounds. So our next plot here, this is ryegrass overseeding on October 4th, but now we're at 900 pounds per acre. That's not a common rate for the Southeast. That's used in other parts of the country where ryegrass overseeding is a little bit more common. But again, increasing our rate is giving us more suppression of any POA that might come through. And this is being researched and shared with you in that often when we look at the price of ryegrass seed, we think about it just as buying plant material. But at some level, knowing the weed suppression that comes from the plant competition, that increase in seeding rate can be helpful and can almost be viewed as an additional herbicide application because of what we see it do compared to the surrounding areas that are non-overseeded. And here's a good plot to finish on to show why. So this is HGT Kentucky Bluegrass overseeded on the same date, October 4th, 2023. And you notice there's a lot more weeds in here than what we have in our ryegrass overseeded plots, even the ryegrass plots at the lowest rate. Kentucky bluegrass as a species is much slower to germinate from seed and matures at a much slower rate than ryegrass. So we had less plant competition in this plot after it was overseeded compared to what we saw with our ryegrass overseeded plots earlier. And that lack of plant competition has put us in a place where we have more weeds. Either way, we're still probably going to need a herbicide program in a ryegrass overseeded scenario. So we'll go now and take a look at some herbicide programs for use in overseeded ryegrass. So earlier, we looked at differences in POA control with variable ryegrass overseeding rates. Here, we're going to look at herbicide programs for POA control and overseeded ryegrass at a single rate. So every treatment that we look at today will be in a ryegrass stand that was overseeded at 300 pounds per acre. We have several to get through, so we'll get started. So our first plot is our non-treated control. Again, that's the standard for every herbicide trial that we do to have non-treated check plots. Our POA population is herbicide susceptible. First herbicide to look at, this is Barricade. This was applied 8 weeks prior to overseeding. This is a labeled program putting the Barricade out well before overseeding, and then that allows for the ryegrass to establish and germinate from seed and provide some residual POA control to go along with it. Similar concept, this was a superintendent request, looking at a Sencor application. So this is 8 ounces of Sencor applied 8 weeks before seeding. This is a mixture of Barricade plus Sencor, again applied 8 weeks before seeding. This is an interesting treatment. So this is Barricade applied 8 weeks before seeding, and then looking at Trimmet applications. Trimmet as a plant growth regulator is typically used in overseeded ryegrass once the ryegrass gets to 85% canopy cover. There is a restriction on when the last Trimmet application can be made before overseeding, and then when the first application can be made after the seed is emerged from the soil. Here we have applications 2 weeks before overseeding, and then applications of Trimmet 6 weeks after overseeding. Our next treatment is an experimental herbicide that's being developed for POA control. We've tested this in overseeded ryegrass scenarios now for 2 seasons. This is an application of that product at 6 fluid ounces per 1,000 square feet, applied 4 weeks before ryegrass overseeding. Here, this is an interesting concept that kind of comes out of work done in non-overseeded bermudagrass. We've talked in other videos about a glyphosate spike. Here, we've taken that Barricade application, and now that's going out 8 weeks before overseeding, and then 7 days before we plant our overseeded ryegrass, we're making an application of Roundup at 5 ounces per acre. That's a low enough rate that there's safety to the bermudagrass. There's not going to be any soil residual that'll inhibit the ryegrass as it's germinating, and there's enough activity in that low rate to control seedling POA plants that may be emerging. Next treatment kind of builds on that. So one of the things that's done in ryegrass overseeding pretty typically as is standard is an application of Revolver 7 days before the seed is planted. Here we have kind of combining strategies. So this is Barricade 8 weeks before ryegrass overseeding, and then Roundup plus Revolver, the Roundup at 5 ounces, and then the Revolver application 7 days before we plant our seed. So this treatment kind of combines everything, which we really need to do in an overseeded ryegrass scenario because our number of tools that we have to work with is just far more limited. Here we have Barricade 8 weeks before ryegrass overseeding. Then 7 days before we plant the ryegrass at this site, we treat with Revolver and Roundup, 5 ounces of Roundup, 17 ounces of Revolver. And then we're making applications of ProGrass, another herbicide used for POA control and overseeded ryegrass. Treatments were made November 13th and December 4th. So that's kind of the total approach of all the tools we have available from a herbicide standpoint to control POA in this scenario. Golf courses were asking, well, if I overseed my ryegrass and I have ultra-dwarf bermudagrass greens, and say I take that ryegrass overseed to the collar, right to the edge of the putting surface, would herbicides that I put on the green injure my overseeded ryegrass that would be in the collar? So what we've done is we've looked at Anderson's Crab and Goose. This is applied in December. This would not be an optimal timing for POA control, but it's in this test to simulate if this was applied to a putting surface and then was inadvertently put into an overseeded ryegrass collar, what sort of injury would we see? Same goes for this treatment here. This is a benzolide application. This was applied December 4th in this test on top of overseeded ryegrass, and it was a safe application, not a timing that would optimize for pre-control with benzolide as a standalone, but again, we're trying to understand how it fits into an overseeded ryegrass scenario where it may be applied to a grain. So this was an application of freehand. Freehand is something that our program has worked with quite a bit in non-overseeded ryegrass scenarios. This was our first look at freehand in overseeded ryegrass. This was applied to overseeded ryegrass again on December 4th, and we have seen negative effects from this. We have reduced our ryegrass canopy. This would be commercially unacceptable, and use of freehand in an overseeded ryegrass scenario should be avoided. So next treatment we're going to look at, so this is kind of builds off the freehand concept. Freehand was a combination of pendimethalin and dimethatamide, the active ingredient in Tower. This is tower alone, but applied at a much different timing. So here we're looking at tower applied on March 11th for post-emergence control of POA in this overseeded ryegrass stand. If one opens a tower label, there'll be use directions on there restricting applications to cool season turf when POA is part of that canopy, because the active is injurious to POA plants. And that's what we're hoping to see here. It's a little soon to make a conclusion based on the spray only occurring on March 11th, but from a safety standpoint to the ryegrass, things certainly look positive. And then our final treatment, this is Poa Cure. This is a herbicide that's used particularly in creeping bentgrass putting greens for POA control. There are use directions for POA control and overseeded ryegrass with Poa Cure. This is the first foray for our program looking at this as a tool for POA control and overseeded ryegrass. This was sprayed on March 11th, so again, probably too soon to make any conclusions, but the safety to the ryegrass certainly is there. So the last trial we're going to look at is focusing on a new herbicide that'll launch in 2024 called Velocity PM. Many may remember Velocity was previously sold in a WDG formulation. Here, this is a liquid formulation of Velocity, and we're looking at it as a tool for POA control and overseeded ryegrass. So our first plot here is a non-treated check plot. Again, POA here is herbicide susceptible. Everything from a ryegrass standpoint was seeded at 300 pounds per acre on October 4th of 2023. So the first plot we'll look at is Velocity PM. This was applied at 2.3 fluid ounces per acre. Application was made on November 13th, so about a month after our ryegrass overseeding occurred. We were ryegrass overseeded on October 4th. You can see the control from that treatment. Here we have a little bit higher application rate. So this is 3.4 fluid ounces of Velocity PM on the same date. And then we're going to step up rates even more. This is 4.6 fluid ounces per acre of Velocity PM on that same date, November 13th, which was following a ryegrass overseeding event on October 4th. Comparatively, this is somewhat of an industry standard program. So this is ProGrass, 2 applications, ProGrass at 1.125 quarts per acre. Applications made November 13th and December 13th. Again, that's an industry standard treatment, and you can see here on a herbicide susceptible population as to why. So the next treatment, this is Velocity PM, but here we've applied it before overseeding. So this was Velocity applied 7 days prior to overseeding. So our application there was September 25th, and you can see the POA control from that treatment. This is compared to another industry standard. This is Revolver applied 7 days before overseeding, which is pretty typical in this region for those that are overseeding ryegrass. That's all we have to share for ryegrass overseeding work for this year. If there are any treatments that are of interest to you, please reach out to the team at UT, and we'll do our best to incorporate them into trials for the forthcoming season. And until then, thank you for watching.